Hey there, Timberwolves. Miss Robolino coming in with another lecture on our government unit. So as you know, things have kind of been thrown off because of the storm last week. So I wanted to go ahead and make sure that I record some lectures for you to make sure that you have an understanding of what you are looking at if you seem to be confused during our face-to-face or our virtual Zoom lectures. So let's go ahead and let's just kind of get started with how you should be filling out your virtual ISN or your paper, which we kind of folded in class. It kind of looks like this. So I will obviously be going back and forth in between the share so you can see the picture bigger when I get into it. So let me go ahead and go through this. So as of right now, we have filled out the information. Let me just focus this. Autofocus. Okay, so we have completed limited government for the 7 principles. We did that right before we left for the break, I guess the winter storm. Today, which is the 23rd of February, we went over the separation of powers. And then this, we are filling out checks and balances. So what you're going to do now, for those of you who are face-to-face, today you're going to fill out this part right here, checks and balances with this lecture. And on the inside, you are going to work on checks and balances by filling out how each branch is limited by the other branches by using and writing on these arrows. I am going to be writing information on these arrows and showing you how I'm doing it. So for example, this right here is the legislative branch. And this arrow right here goes to the legislative branch, basically showing, let me actually turn that around. Basically showing one thing, that how the legislative branch limits the judicial branch. Okay, what is it that, how does the legislative branch limit the judicial branch? That would be this arrow. And then here we would see the judicial branch and see how the judicial branch going this way limits the legislative branch. Then we would be looking at the legislative branch and how it limits the executive branch and how the executive branch limits the legislative branch. And then coming over here to how does the executive branch limit the judicial branch and how does the judicial branch limit the executive branch. So this is called checks and balances. And in this lesson, we're going to go through each one of these arrows that shows how it limits each particular one. So please make sure, in my opinion, you have different colored pens or highlighters to go ahead and make sure that you can know what goes where so it can fit very easy. So as you go ahead and you start getting ready, please grab those pens. Feel free to put me on pause now and go ahead and grab what you need. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm gonna go ahead and put my share back up for you to see our brain teaser. Okay, so our brain teaser is, why is it important to separate the powers of government into 3 branches? So in class today on the 23rd, we talked about the separation of powers with the 3 branches, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. We talked about who was inside each one, and we talked about what members are there. For example, the legislative branch is a bicameral system, which is broken up into the House of Representatives and the Senate, which makes up the Congress. You see this inside of Texas state as well as the federal with the United States. So now we're going to go ahead and go into how each branch stops or limits the power of another branch. So looking at the brain teaser, separation of powers, what it does is it limits the branches from gaining more power. It forces them to stay in their lane. So this way they cannot overpass or overrule on the different branches, which kind of keeps everything in limited power, which in the end protects the American citizens. So let's go ahead and let's walk through this. So right now we're looking at checks and balances. You should be filling out the definition right now and giving the example. The example is Congress can impeach the president. So right now we are on the front page that looks like this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share for a second. And we are filling out this part right here, checks and balances, the definition and the example. So the definition right here is going to be a system of checks and balances, safeguard against safeguards against abuse of power. So that's what you're writing right here for the definition. And the example is going to be Congress can impeach the president. That's what you're putting right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put my share back on. So go ahead and put that in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and move forward. So with that kind of example, checks and balances, like it says before, it prevents each branch from abusing its power to do what they want to do. For example, the president to go ahead and claim that he is president for life. The other two branches are going to stop that. The legislative branch, if they want to make laws that only benefit the upper class or the high class, well, that can be stopped by the president and the judicial branch. Or what if the judicial branch wants to go ahead and just start discriminating against women? So every woman who is put into a crime is found guilty. That obviously can be stopped by Congress and the executive branch. So again, this just goes to show you how we can protect the citizens with limited power inside of separation of powers. And then now we're going to go through checks and balances. So now we're looking at the legislative branch and how the legislative branch limits the judicial branch and limits the executive branch. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start off with this right now. On the executive side, so if we can take a look right here on we are right here at the legislative branch, and we are looking at how the legislative branch limits the executive branch. So we are on this arrow right here. This is where you're going to write those notes right here. Okay, the best way to do this is to write the notes that are in red. So you would write right here, Senate may confirm president appointments, which would be the Secretary of State. Congress may override a presidential veto. And then Congress may impeach a president. So again, that is showing you that the legislative branch, which is made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives, can impeach the president. Okay, they can also override a president's veto. And they can go ahead and also confirm the presidential's appointments, which means the secretaries, Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense. For example, if the president wanted to choose me as the Secretary of Defense, which would absolutely be a horrible decision, but you know, the president's my friend and he wants to give me that position. I have to be interviewed by Congress, which means the House of Representatives and the Senate, on if I am qualified. After the interview, they are obviously going to see that I'm not qualified and they can stop me from taking that position, and the president has to choose someone else. So that is an example for you. So let me just go back to here. So you're going to go ahead and fill that out. Okay, in that arrow. Now we're going to look at how the legislative branch affects the judicial branch. Okay, so on the judicial side, okay, this is what Congress can do, just making sure you understand. So Congress on the judicial side can go ahead and determine numbers of justices on the Supreme Court. So just to kind of show you where we are here, we are now on this part where the legislative branch, okay, is limiting the judicial branch. So we're going to go ahead and fill out the information on this arrow here on the bottom that goes from legislative to judicial in red. You're going to be writing down things that say determines the number of chief justices, okay, approves presidential appointments, impeach a sitting justice, may propose an amendment to the Constitution to overturn a Supreme Court decision. Okay, so the legislative branch can do a couple things to the judicial branch. They can determine the number of justices. What that means is they can say, okay, these are the high judges. They work for the Supreme Court. They can add another. The Senate can approve presidential appointments. Okay, So to the federal courts, what that means is the Senate can decide which judges go into the judicial system. So for example, if you have a judge who is very biased, who is also very racial prejudice, which that basically means is what we learned in the Civil War, if they are against people of color, the legislative branch can stop that judge from coming into the judicial branch to make sure that it protects its citizens. So just to kind of show you. Or what if you have a judge who is completely against women and wants to make sure that they are always, you know, limited on their rights? The legislative branch can come in and be like, you know what, you're not being approved to be in the judicial branch. We're stopping this. Okay. Now we can also see they can impeach a sitting justice. So let's say, for example, if a sitting justice is performing crimes, like what if they decide to go ahead and take money under the table to go ahead and decide the fate of somebody? So that's called bribing. If that happens to be seen or reported, the legislative branch can kick that judge out, because obviously you don't want a judge who can be bribed, because then that will obviously not be true justice. Okay, and lastly, Congress may propose an amendment to the Constitution, which basically says, hey, we need to overturn this Supreme Court decision, just like the Dred Scott decision in the Civil War. We saw that Dred Scott was a slave and he had no rights. The 14th Amendment was determined by the Congress to go ahead and give rights to African Americans. So that is an example of that. Let's go ahead and let's move forward. And again, remember, you can always pause me if I'm moving too fast. Let's take a look at the executive branch. So we're going to be here in the executive branch. We are going to be here on top with the executive branch, and we're going to be working with this arrow over here, how the executive branch limits the legislative branch. And we're also going to be here, how the executive branch limits the judicial branch. Okay, so those are the two arrows we're going to be working with. Okay, so looking right here, we're going to see the executive branch. How does the executive branch limit the legislative branch? Well, it's very simple. Presidents may veto a Congress bill. So let's say, for example, Congress says, we're making a bill that says that Congress gets an 80% pay raise. Okay, that bill must go to the president's desk, and he's going to look at it and he's going to say, whoa, this is not justice. He can say veto. That's it. You don't get that. And the bill is killed and it has to start again. Okay, so that is just an example. Now, how does the executive branch limit the judicial branch? Well, let me show you. Okay, the president may appoint federal judges, which means that he can choose which federal judges can be put into the judicial system, which can make a difference for the people or for how the executive branch wants the law to be viewed. Okay, he can also choose ambassadors and other officers. An ambassador is someone who represents the country inside other states. For example, you can be an ambassador to Syria, which is a really big hotspot right now, and looking at how the U.S. is represented. So that's how the executive branch gets in, is able to go ahead and overturn and help limit the power of the judicial branch. Okay, we're going to move on to the judicial branch right now, and how the judicial branch limits the power of the executive and the legislative. So if you can kind of take a look right here, we are right here. So here is the judicial branch, and we're going to be working with this arrow right here, how the judicial branch limits the legislative, and this arrow right here, how the judicial branch limits the executive power. Okay, let's go ahead and let's get started. So looking right here, okay, the judicial branch on the executive side can do this. They may rule presidential actions unconstitutional. So basically what that means, if a president is impeached, it's the judicial branch job to decide whether the president was unconstitutional. Okay, so if you remember, we saw that the legislative branch can impeach the president, but just because he's impeached doesn't mean he's out of office. It's the judicial branch to decide whether he was unconstitutional or not. So you see how the judicial branch limits the executive branch, okay, in that sense. Next, how does the judicial branch limit the legislative? Well, the legislative may rule laws passed by Congress unconstitutionally. What that means is they can stop specific bills from being passed if they are considered unconstitutional. They go against the Constitution right now. And the judicial branch can overturn any existing law. So let's say Congress passes a law that says it is illegal to be left-handed. Okay, obviously there are many left-handed people in the world, and that would be very unconstitutional. The judicial branch can go ahead and look at this bill and say it is unconstitutional, and they can go ahead and take it to court, explain why it's unconstitutional, and kill that law and remove it from the federal court system as well as the federal legislation. So again, this is showing the checks and balances in between each. So what this does, if you remember, it stops the abuse of power in each branch. Each branch is very important, and it allows the success of our country to continue the way it is. So if we kind of take a look, we start to see the U.S. Constitution is the ultimate law of the land. It decides how things go. So if you can tell over here, we're looking at the hierarchy. A hierarchy is how something is placed on a scale. Something is most important on top and has all power, and then to the bottom, which has less. Underneath that, the only way to change the Constitution is to add an amendment. Okay, an amendment means a change to a federal document. So that can only be done by the legislative and the executive. Those two are going to, legislative makes the laws, and the executive branch can go ahead and veto it, or it can go ahead and do other things. The judicial branch can go ahead and also step in and make sure that it is constitutional. Okay. And the requirements to pass amendment make it very difficult. So again, many bills are created every single day. A bill wants to become a law, but many of them get killed before they even make it to the president's desk. Okay, then that's where you see the Supreme Court. Then under the Supreme Court, you have the congressional law and the executive order. If the Supreme Court determines something violates the Constitution, the only way to overturn their decision is to add an amendment. So for example, what if the president decides to go ahead and make an executive order where he is president for life? Obviously, that is unconstitutional. The legislative branch and the judicial branch would come together and create an amendment that say presidents can only run for so many years. Okay, obviously now we have 4, and these are some things I want you to kind of think about. How does that stop the president from becoming a full-on monarch? Well, not monarch, but like a authoritarian, being able to control and take over. There have been 27 amendments passed since 1787. We have 27 amendments. The first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. Okay, federal law has supremacy over state laws. What that means is if a state law is passed, the federal court system can come in and determine those state laws unconstitutional. For example, in Texas, what if we were to go ahead and say that it is illegal to go ahead and have dogs as pets? Well, obviously there'd be a lot of people who would be very upset, and the federal court system can come in and say that's not right, it's unconstitutional, we're going to go ahead and bypass that law. So those are just kind of examples. That would never happen. These are really extreme made-up examples, but just to show you how that works. Now, taking a look at the chart, I want you to kind of see where we are. The Constitution is the law of the lands, okay? Then you have the Supreme Court. From there, you have the executive orders and the congressional law. Then you have state laws. State laws are on the bottom, which means, yes, states can run their states how they want. But again, it has to go ahead and make sure that it does not infringe on people's rights on a federal level. Okay, so for example, what if Texas decided to go ahead and keep the rights after the Civil War, such as limiting people to be able to vote because of color or because of intelligence? What if they made you take an intelligence test, and if you didn't pass it, you couldn't vote? That infringes on your right as a person to go ahead and, you know, vote for your president or vote for your constituents. So this is kind of where federal law takes over state law. I hope this tutorial, but this lesson really explains things for you, and it allows you to, think of things before we move on. Well, tomorrow my goal is to hopefully play a game with y'all and kind of test your knowledge on checks and balances. If you have any issues, please make sure you reach out to me through email or talk to me during Zoom or face-to-face in person, or come to morning tutorials for me if you're face-to-face, or kind of work from there. Well, for my KVA kids, you obviously don't have this paper, but as I explained today in class, you should be moving through slide 4 and slide 6 and 7. Any other questions? I'll be available. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.